Time to make one of my favorite football game classics, Rotel cheese dip. So this is a dip that, comes from the name of it, one of its ingredients, but it's got a lot of other stuff in it. So we start by browning some ground beef. So this is 80-20 ground beef, and you don't have to have any particular fat amount. I just happen to like ground chuck and 80-20. You're going to have to drain the fat at that fat level, of course, and it works really nicely. By the way, you don't have to have beef in this. There are plenty of people who make this dip with just cheese and Rotel, but I like it actually with some extra stuff, and I'm going to show you in this recipe what I put in, because I really do feel like I've cracked the code for this dip. It's pretty good. So we're gonna just break up the meat. You want it in the smallest possible pieces, because you don't, when you're spooning the dip out, you can't have like some large chunk. So basically what I'm gonna do here is I'm going to sort of break it up as finely as I can over a period of a minute or two. And then we're gonna just brown the meat. Once you've got the meat browned, then it's time to add the namesake of the dish. So I use these canned Rotel diced tomatoes and green chilies. And the important thing to note is that I'm using no salt added. It's really easy for the salt to get out of control in this dish, and I like to be able to control it, so I use no salt. The other key ingredient is this. I'm using half a can, and I'm going to puree them. That gives me the heat level I want, plus that really smoky taste. And it's a very complex taste because that adobo sauce has a lot of different ingredients going on. At this point, you can see that much of the fat is rendering out of this ground beef. And in a minute, when I'm satisfied that I've got most of the fat out of it, and I've got a little bit of color on the meat, I'm going to remove the fat. While I've been browning the meat, off to the side, I pureed the chipotle peppers in my mini food processor. And so that processes them from whole peppers into this beautiful colored paste, which I'm gonna add all of this into the cheese dip. I always move it over into a small container so that it's easier to add into the dish later rather than trying to work around the blade of the food processor. Now it's time to drain the meat. So I think the easiest way to drain the meat is to simply push the meat to the opposite side of the pan from the handle. And it actually helps that the left side of the screen there is the slightly lower side of the stovetop. So the fat normally wants to drift ever so slightly to the left there. And then basically, I just put in a paper towel and sop it up. And that's going to take, it probably takes 2 or 3 paper towels for a pound of beef, but basically you don't have to dirty something else. And then I just put in another one, and you can just toss these paper towels. That way you don't get any grease in the drain or anything like that. And you don't have to dirty another strainer or pot or anything like that. And you can get rid of basically as much of the fat as I want to get rid of, which is most of it, maybe 90% of it. So I'm going to just tilt the pan there and get rid of some last bits. This is a really good way of getting rid of the fat from just one pound of ground beef. So now it's time to add what I think is a pretty crucial ingredient. And it's half a stick of chorizo. And this is a high quality chorizo. It produces a really interesting depth of flavor. Obviously, it's also stains the dish, so it produces a slightly different color. But it cooks very quickly. It's easy to break up, and the ground beef completely finishes during that time, and it'll get a little on the side of the ground beef there that's touching the bottom of the pan, get a little bit of color on that as well. So basically, the chipotle peppers in adobo sauce and the chorizo are, from my perspective, sort of the two crucial ingredients of this dish, both of which most people don't use. So now I'm just gonna brown the chorizo, and I'm gonna speed this up because, of course, watching meat brown is probably about as exciting as watching paint dry. But while we're on the subject of meat, I will say that, there's a lot of different meats that people use in this. Probably besides the two I'm using here, the most popular is breakfast sausage. I actually don't care for breakfast sausage in this. To me, it tastes too distinctively of breakfast sausage, and so the dip loses sort of any kind of southwestern kind of flavor. So that's why I don't use it, but lots of people do, especially from Texas, and I've had it, and it's good. It's just not the way I like to make this dip. Now it's time to add some seasonings. So I'm keeping this pretty simple. What I do is I'm gonna add 2 teaspoons of chili powder, and then I'm gonna add 2 teaspoons of smoked paprika, and finally 1 teaspoon of cumin. I think the funny thing is, cumin is a weird taste because it can go from mild to completely overwhelming the dish very fast. So I find you do have to be careful with the cumin. By the way, it's pretty important to add the spices at this point. So you need to add them while you still have oil in the bottom of the dish. Because what I'm doing is I'm blooming those seasonings in the oil. That rounds out their flavors and deepens them and really makes them more distinct. It's really important to do it at this step instead of adding them later to a whole vat of the dip. So it's time to add the tomatoes and chilies. I just use 1 can, and of course it's important to leave all the juice in the can. You don't drain it. That adds some moisture, some flavor. That moisture allows you to deglaze the bottom of the pan correctly because you saw there were a lot of brown bits. There's a lot of flavor there. You need to be able to get that up. And then I'm going to add in the chipotles as well. And so this is when it really starts to come together. Pretty much what you're looking at right now is the dip minus the cheese. Oh, I lied. I do add one more thing. I add chopped scallions. So basically that's about 2 or 3 scallion stalks. And all I've done is chopped up the green parts fairly small. I like the texture of this, and it gives it a little vegetal taste, which I really like. There's just an onion taste is just a very distinctive taste that really, I think, rounds out a dish. Time to add the cheese. So here we've got 1 pound of Velveeta cheese. So this, and plus the tomatoes, the Rotel is really the 2 defining ingredients of this dish, and they're really the only 2 you need to create the base of this dish that everybody would recognize as a Rotel dip. So you're going to add it all and basically just stir it. You can cut up the cheese into the smallest pieces that you want. I usually just use pieces about the size of my finger. It doesn't matter. I'm not in any rush. It all melts. and it only takes a few minutes. You know, a lot of people make this dish in a crock pot, and I do sometimes too. But if I know that I'm going to serve the dip immediately after making it, then I just make it in this cast iron chicken fryer. At this point, I'm going to season the dish a little bit. Since I didn't add any salt in the tomatoes, I know I'm going to add a little bit of salt. But I know from previous experience how not to overdo it at this point. So I'm adding right there about a teaspoon of kosher salt. Then I'm going to add another ingredient which is totally optional. I always use it for this, and that's MSG. You can get MSG obviously in any supermarket. Obviously, you know, if you're using breakfast sausage in your dip, then of course you're already using MSG. If you're using like Jimmy Dean's breakfast sausage, which has a pretty strong MSG component to it. But the MSG really does create a sort of savoriness that it's difficult to achieve without it. And you don't need to add a lot. By the way, in terms of the amount, I'm adding about a quarter teaspoon for this entire pan. So at this point, it's really just a matter of melting the cheese. I'll speed this up so that you don't have to watch cheese melt. But it'll, you know, gradually sort of get thinner and thinner because, you know, the cheese is melting and you're essentially also sort of diluting all of the other ingredients as each piece of cheese melts and gets incorporated into the dish. So we're just gonna stir it until it's totally smooth. And at that point, it's really ready to go. What I do is I just cover it and let it sit until I'm ready to serve it. When you're ready to serve it, you do have to stir back the condensation on the lid, stir that back in. There it is, a beautiful, smoky, creamy Rotel dip, ready for the game.